Do you want to run faster, not just for one season, but for years and decades to come? It's tempting to believe that the path to improvement is straightforward. Just stay consistent with your training and steadily increase your mileage. But what if I told you there's more to the story? Research has shown that even runners who consistently maintain a high mileage are still susceptible to a decline in their Vo2 Max, diminishing muscle strength, weakening tendons, and even an onset of brittle bones. This is not the path you want to tread if your goal is to run faster and further. But the big question is how? How can we hold on to these attributes and get faster as we age? To address this question, I've decided to give You Run Smarter scholars a comprehensive checklist to help you evaluate what you're currently excelling at and what areas may require improvement. I obtained this checklist from the author of this insightful paper, Rich Willie, which I'll link down in the description below. However, I must admit it was really hard trying to find these recommendations within the paper. It was a bit like hunting for hidden treasure. You have to really look hard to uncover it. Nonetheless, let's delve into this treasure chest and explore the first checkpoint, which is maintaining your running volume. Now, I know I said before that you can't maintain your full fitness and strength by just keeping to high running volume. That's why there are more items on this checklist. However, it's undeniable that the more mileage you maintain as you age, the slower that decline of Vo2 Max. While you can't entirely halt this decline, you can significantly slow it down. Think of it like an iceberg floating in the ocean. The slow melting process is inevitable. But with this checklist in place, you can swap a small, vulnerable iceberg for a big, robust iceberg, and that starts with successfully adding on mileage. Now, the slow melting process seems insignificant in comparison. So the question arises, how can you safely increase your mileage without risking injury? Well, the goal here is to slowly build your mileage over time while avoiding any abrupt changes. This doesn't only mean abrupt changes in mileage, but also applies to intense workouts, changes in terrain or footwear, and other elements that influence how much load goes through your body. A practical way you can avoid these abrupt changes is by monitoring your exercise units. I've explained this in earlier videos, but for a refresher, you want to rate your level of intensity out of 10 for a specific workout. Make sure it's the average spread across the whole entire workout and not just your effort level at the very end. Then multiply that intensity level by how many minutes of that session. Once you have a number, do it for every other workout and calculate the weekly total. Now it's your job to make sure each week only increases by 5 to 15%. If you have 3 or 4 weeks in a row of really pushing the upper limits, then a down week of 50 to 80% of your total mileage may be warranted. If you decide to add hills or transition to a different type of shoe, just be patient and be sensible with the transition process. If you aren't training for races and you're content with your current training volumes, maintaining a high mileage will help slow down the rate of your melting iceberg. But as this paper points out, those who preserve most of their Vo2 Max not only maintain a high training volume, but also maintain similar high intensities that they did decades prior. That is why this is the second recommendation, doing shorter and faster intervals. This works wonders in several ways. Firstly, it will challenge your heart and lungs in a way that slow, easy running just can't match. But it also promotes stronger muscles and stiffer tendons, which are crucial building blocks for running faster. So dedicate 1 day a week to faster interval training. Start with a 15-minute warm-up, starting really slow and gradually increasing the pace throughout that warm-up. After the warm-up, pick a duration of your intervals. I recommend a range between 1 and 5 minutes, followed by a 1-minute recovery jog. Then allocate the number of repeats, which is usually around 4 to 8. For example, you can start with 4 rounds of 5-minute efforts at a 7 out of 10 intensity, with a 1-minute recovery jog in between, and with a 15-minute warm-up and a 5-minute cool down. That's a decent 40-minute session. For something more intense, you can try, say, 8 repeats of 1 minute efforts at a 9 out of 10, and then adding in your 1 minute recovery in between those repeats. Try to be creative with this every week, and try to embrace the variety while pushing outside of your comfort zone. The tricky balance with these workouts is making sure that your exercise units aren't creating an abrupt change. Take that 40-minute session I suggested earlier. Each interval round, if you include that recovery minute, adds up to 38 exercise units. If we include that warm-up and cool-down, this session totals 212 exercise units. So calculate your workouts ahead of time and plan out your training week to avoid any sudden spikes. Another helpful tip, especially for you older runners, is to start polarizing your training. Let me explain. Most of us have heard about the 80-20 rule, right? This suggests that the optimal balance between training load and recovery should be spending 80% of your time in a really easy intensity, which is typically below a 4 out of 10 intensity. This leaves us 20% to push into the harder efforts. Well, polarized training still factors in this 80-20 rule, but works on the extremes, meaning easy days are really easy and hard days are really hard. But for some of you scholars, only doing intense exercise for 10 to 20 minutes a week seems quite boring. Luckily, the next intervention on this checklist solves this issue and will also help preserve your bone density. Number 3 on this checklist focuses on high intensity cross training, such as spin classes or group fitness classes. During the peak weeks of your marathon training, you may include this once a week. But in your off season, or if you're really prone to running related injuries, cross training 2 or 3 times a week is recommended and will even help mitigate and prevent some of these running injuries. If you decide to move away from the class setting, decide to do something on your own, program each session around about 40 to 60 minutes and try to use the same format as the running intervals I mentioned earlier. While we're on this topic, I wanted to bring up the maintenance of your bone density, which is important for aging runners to prevent things like stress fractures, arthritic changes, and even broken bones after traumatic events like falling over. You might think that the impact of hitting the ground when running is enough to trigger bone growth, but in reality, your bones become very numb and bored to this stimulus. On top of that, running is a very sagittal plane movement, so you're only loading your bones in one direction. This is why it's no surprise to see endurance athletes have worse bone density compared to other athletes. If your goal is to build and maintain bone density, you should be including multi-directional explosive activities, which is why fitness classes and team sports can be so beneficial. Similar to the bone density loss, research shows the aging endurance athlete can't prevent the decline of muscle mass and tendon strength with just running alone. We combat this with our next intervention, which can also help reduce your risk of injury, help you run faster, and has been shown to help build your bone density. I'm talking about strength training, in particular slow and heavy strength training. It's good to know that no matter what decade you find yourself in, strength training can still help you put on muscle mass, and this will benefit your running performance, ranging from the young 5K recreational runners all the way up to your older ultra athletes. So practically, you should be investing 2 strength sessions per week, consisting of squats, deadlifts, lunges, and calf raises, with the focus on heavy strength. The aim should be 3 sets of 8 to 10 reps, but if you're experienced in the gym, 4 sets of 6 to 8 reps is better and will produce faster running times. This paper makes a specific point to focus on the plantar flexors, in other words, strengthening your calves. This is because masters runners tend to lose power in their push-off, and as a result, their run turns into more of a shuffle, and also the risk of a calf injury starts to increase. So combat this with standing calf raises while maintaining a small knee bend. Just avoid straightening your knees at the top of the movement and avoiding looking like Michael Jackson and coming up onto the toes without an upward momentum. When it comes to your weekly structure, I like to have one day dedicated only to strength training. and the second strength day paired with a short running workout. If you have the luxury of time, my preference is to run in the morning, with your strength session being about 6 to 8 hours later. Even though you can build muscle mass at any age, you need to have patience. That's because as we get older, the slower the rate of tendon adaptation, also known as collagen synthesis. Rich Willie suggests allowing about 6 months of slow progression in the gym for sufficient tendon adaptation. And if I haven't convinced you yet, let's not forget the other crucial benefits strength training has as we get older, such as recharging your metabolism, reducing body fat, and resisting the effects of diabetes. Now, you may have picked up me talking about tendons a lot, including the importance of tendon stiffness. I'm not talking about the sore type of stiffness that tendons get when they're overloaded. Instead, I'm talking about adapting your tendons into robust, stiff, efficient springs, which will then carry over into better running economy and faster running times. And when it comes to increasing tendon stiffness, implementing plyometrics will help do the trick. The speed work and heavy strength training I mentioned earlier will also help contribute to tendon stiffness, but scheduling a plyometric session once every 1 to 2 weeks is like having an unlimited supply of icy cold water that you can hose onto your iceberg, effectively covering it in a solid layer of protection. And since masters runners need to pay extra attention to the calves, here is my go-to exercise. At the start of your gym session, do 5 rounds of jump rope, lasting 30 to 45 seconds before a 60-second recovery. Do this while keeping your form really rigid with a very short contact time. Remember, we need to restore the stiffness in our tendons, so slow jumps with a lot of moving parts won't produce the desired outcome. You can progress this by sprinkling in 5 to 10 second bouts of single leg hopping, or by jumping with more force and passing the rope under your feet twice per jump, also known as double unders. By incorporating all of these elements into your checklist, you'll transform your running journey into an unstoppable force. But there's more. What if I told you you had the power to place your iceberg into colder waters? Now that will really help preserve your running for decades to come. This part of the analogy refers to enhancing your recovery. Because unfortunately, as we get older, it takes longer and longer to recover and bounce back from those harder workout sessions. So your next task is to learn the most effective recovery methods while spending a bit less time on the recovery methods that don't really stack up in the research. Luckily, I've created this video that lists the most popular recovery methods from the most to least effective. So click on it now and I'll see you there.